Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. We are here live with you to talk about hard things. So I am Allie. I'm the founder of The Right Place, Right Time. I'm a international book coach, an award-winning author, and a ghostwriter. I'm here with friend, client, forthcoming author, Sam. And today we are talking about elements of his book, Though I Walk, and specifically what his book is talking about is child sexual abuse at the hands of clergymen or priests. Today, we're having a very honest but hard conversation around victimization and sexual abuse of children. Sam is going to speak from both a victim and survivor himself, but also as a mental health professional. So this is a really important conversation, though I know it's one that often makes us uncomfortable. And so I feel really honored to be having this conversation with Sam. And we're really hoping that those who check this out, either joining us live or catching the replay, are going to gain some really important information about this topic as we talk through things. But before we dive into that, I want to give chance to Sam. I want to give Sam a chance to tell us a little bit about himself and the book that he's writing and the work that he does in the world.
Great. Well, good morning. For me, I guess it's good afternoon for you.
Yeah, that's right.
So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I spent 20 plus years as a children's mental health provider in the Los Angeles area, dealing with children from birth up to the age of 24. Currently, I work at a private practice in the Las Vegas, Henderson area, seeing individual couples and families. Many of my clients have had experienced childhood trauma. And currently I'm working on a book, so I'm in the process of becoming an author.
Amazing. Sam has done some really incredible work in the mental health field. And I think it's really magnificent and a little bit awe-inspiring, in all honesty, Sam, to know that you've done this deep, heavy work with people while also being a survivor yourself. And I know that with your journey, you didn't even realize that you were a victim until much later on, and probably not while you were maybe in those 20 years of working with children. But I'm sure even looking back, you have a totally different appreciation of the work that you did with those kids, now that you do have those recovered memories. Is that true?
Definitely. I think, if I would have had the memories prior to and had worked through it, it would be amazing the work that I would have had done so differently. But I think looking back, my heart was always in the right place. My mind was always in the right place. And so developing programs to provide for children and their families was my main upfront focus for those 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? And I have no doubt, knowing you, that like even without your own kind of experience as a victim to draw from, that you went like so well intentioned into all the programming that you did for families. And it probably meant so much to them at the time, to have any kind of support,
Sure.
during those moments of their lives.
Sure.
So Sam, one of the things that I know that you're aiming for your book to be able to do is to kind of like shed light on something that's really difficult, that is happening a lot, that we don't often talk about, right? So there's child sexual abuse, and there's child sexual abuse within the church. And it's not that one is worse than the other, like general child sexual abuse is somehow better than, but child sexual abuse at the hands of somebody who is representing God and an all-knowing being is kind of a different sort of beast, and a different kind of manipulation and angle, right? Because using that position of power and authority to manipulate the situation. How did being abused by somebody in a position of power who is wearing the cloth impact or complicate your trauma, or change the way that you understood your faith, or whether or not there's a higher power out there in the world?
That's really interesting, because for the longest time, although I didn't realize this until I did a lot of my own self-healing, is I didn't believe that there was a loving God that was available to me. Because God was used as a threat against me to keep me from telling anybody that the abuse was going on. So, my perpetrator, the priest, who was the principal of the school that I attended, um, used the scare tactics of God would get me, God would do stuff to me, God would do stuff to my family if I told on it. So I lost complete faith. Well, I'm not even sure that I lost complete faith. I just did not realize that there was a God that I could trust through my life. That I didn't even turn to God or even think of turning to God in different periods of my life where I was going through some situation. So through my process of healing, I think that I had to rediscover the relationship that I had with a God, and I've definitely done that. Um, and had to weed out kind of the information that was fed to me as the abuse was going on, and make sense of that, and kind of recover from that along with recovery of the sexual abuse.
Yeah. It's just such a layered and complicated thing in my mind. Not as a survivor of child sexual abuse, but as a Catholic.
Yeah,
So we were both raised Catholic, and I just can't, I literally cannot fathom and wrap my head around how perpetrators can be people who are supposed to be holy and supposed to be upholding like the moral code of humanity, which is pretty much any religious person, right? Like
mhm,
regardless of whether what you believe exactly about God or Jesus or anything like that in our kind of Christian religions, um or any faith really. Like when you are the leader, when you are the top dog, that is supposed to be promoting the ideas of love and forgiveness and um you know loving your neighbor and all of the things that keep our world peaceful and wonderful, though we're not doing such a good job of that. It's like, how could you possibly be doing the most horrific thing to anybody in the community, but especially the youngest and most vulnerable of your parishioners? um it's crazy to me and maddening, and uh so contradictory to what they're supposed to be promoting. I don't know how you couldn't question God and faith and the higher being, and who is this thing that has allowed the wolf in sheep's clothing, like quite literally.
right. Well, and the thing that's interesting is as I worked through my journey of healing, I realized that in a classroom, I was being taught how loving a God was. Outside the classroom, when I was taken out of the classroom and was sexually abused, I was told how frightening I should be of God, and that was very confusing for me. And I do remember an incident in the eighth grade when I did question how could my question was something in regards to how could I trust a God who was loving at one point and was mean and threatening at another point. And this priest who was my abuser basically kind of screamed at me in the classroom, "It's because you don't have faith." So once again, it was a put down of how I was not where everybody else was at. I didn't have faith. So there was continuous um, confusion in regards to what religious beliefs I should even believe.
Yeah. Well, and then continual confusion, as you mentioned earlier, about like, when there were other periods of your life when things were really hard, there was no faith or God to turn to because that had been kind of taken off the table, and I think about, when I was going through, recovering from a sexual assault and divorce and miscarriage and death of a roommate at 19, you know, I I looked to faith and God for understanding and meaning, and to not feel alone, and to try to understand why these things were happening or what I was supposed to learn from them. Um, I don't know how I would have gotten through those periods of time without there being some sort of like higher belief system for me to kind of like turn to like give me hope that it was not all for nothing, and so I really feel like, for you and other survivors of this, you've not only been robbed of your trust um and control, but you've also been robbed of a totally different type of safety, a spiritual safety, a spiritual
Right.
belonging, which I think it's one of those elements, right? So, we talked about this, I think, last week when we did our first interview. Trauma is lifelong. The effects of this type of abuse are lifelong. So I feel like that spiritual fracturing, right, is not something that is going to just immediately be put back together or go away. I mean, you said as a part of your journey, you've kind of come to your own terms, but like how many people probably don't?
Exactly. Exactly. Each of us go through the process of healing and recovery and processing differently. So you're absolutely right. Some people may never get onto that journey of being able to reconcile with a God that is loving and caring and helpful and a safe place.
Yeah. So, Sam, I want to ask you about. Oh, I've got so many questions, and I'm trying to decide which one to ask next. Um, let's go here next. As a therapist and as a survivor, what do you know to be true about the victimization of children that most people don't know? Like, what would people not know about children being victimized in this way?
Well, I think that, when people think of sexual abuse, people always think of the dirty old man that's hiding around the corner. And in
Mm,
reality, 90 plus percent of perpetrators know the victim. The victim knows the perpetrator.
yeah,
That could be a family member, it could be a close friend, it could be, you know, priest, it could be a teacher, it could be a coach. So the reality is that the platform or the grounds for it is already set up just due to the relationship that happens, and then the grooming that takes part of that um, creates the ability for the perpetrator to actually have their way with the victim. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is you hear many times that happened a long time ago, and I think that I even hear that sometimes from survivors. It happened a long time ago. I should just move on from it. And the
mm,
reality is it's a lifelong process of healing.
yeah,
I will be completely honest and tell you I have triggers that happen to me on a regular basis. I handle those much differently now, but there are different things that trigger me constantly. I see a priest, it's a trigger for me. I see somebody that's dressed in all black, a man that's dressed in all black, it's a trigger for me, whether he has a collar on or not. So I think it's the lifelong process of healing. And I think it's also the belief that it's a dirty old man that is doing the perpetrating. And the reality is, it's normally not that person.
yeah. I'm so glad that you mentioned that because, as a sexual assault victim, it's the same, right? Like the
Mhm.
stranger danger, right, is kind of cast not just with child abuse, but also with like, sexual assault victims and rape victims that are adults and women. And not that it doesn't happen to men too. Um, but it's always this idea that it's like the stranger in the parking lot or in the dark alley that you walk by. And it's also the same in that it's like usually somebody that you know, even if it's just an acquaintance, you're familiar with that face and that person. Your guard is down. Um, you know, there's an assumption of safety, right? I mean, why wouldn't there be when you're
Right.
familiar with that person? Um, but in children's case, it's extremely devastating because they're already vulnerable anyway because they're impressionable. And now if this person is known to them, their guard is even further down by the fact that they're familiar and aware of this person, and so therefore they are automatically safe, right?
Right.
So the access is there, the trust is there. um, and then grooming, let's talk about grooming for a second. Grooming only then kind of like chips away at
Right.
that idea of safety, right? Because it's getting children to then do what it is that you want them to do and making them believe that it's healthy or safe or okay, right?
Right.
So how would you, as a mental health professional, describe grooming? Like, I know what it is, but for people who aren't familiar with that word.
I think, it's really a process where you're absolutely right. It's a chipping away. So, for instance, I can talk about the grooming of what happened with me is the priest would take me from the classroom and would take me to the gym area and actually tell me how smart I was, tell me how he could trust me. We would go around and check all the locks on the windows and doors. And he would tell me, that I was somebody that he could rely on. He made me feel special on the way to the gym. He'd give me an ice cream cone. So those were different ways to groom me that was, allowing me to go with him, although I didn't really have a choice. I was sitting in a classroom and I would be pulled out. But I think that's a number of ways that grooming happened for me. I think grooming can happen. Let's say that it's a single mother who has children, and the perpetrator offers to mow her lawn on a regular basis, and then starts to have contact with the children, starts to bring them candy bars, starts to have little conversations with them. Mom's trusting of the perpetrator, and then he's able to isolate the children and sexually assault them.
Yeah. So I think it's something that you brought up then that's really interesting for people to know is that grooming is not necessarily something that's only happening with the children that they're targeting, but they're also grooming whole families sometimes, right? To get
Exactly.
their way into a family, a household, access one child, maybe multiple children, and of course pull the curtain, over the parents' eyes so
Right.
that they wouldn't ever suspect that this person would be doing any harm, which probably then also helps in making the children, if they do report, seem less believable because now the adults are trusting of the perpetrator.
Absolutely. And there's also grooming of a community. It can be an outstanding citizen of the community that is doing lots for children, and everybody thinks highly of the person because of all the
Mhm.
things that he is doing
Yeah.
for the child. So there can be a grooming of, you're absolutely right, the child, the family, the community.
And I think we see that too, right, with priests. They have a position of power and authority that's automatically revered or esteemed. And so everybody automatically assumes that this person, because of this position, is X, Y, or Z.
Right.
The community citizen is who does all the charity work is automatically, morally wonderful and great with people, and the priest is also morally sound, because he's a priest, right? And so we just kind of stop critically thinking because we're making these wide sweeping assumptions that because you have these positions of power, you're automatically a good person,
Right.
which is bullshit. So now, what are some things that adults could do to prevent some of these things happening to their kids?
Well, I think the first thing is, as we talked about grooming, is becoming aware of tactics that perpetrators may use for grooming. So if you see that an adult is starting to take overly aggressive liking to your child, kind of isolating the child, just becoming aware of the different grooming techniques is one way to prevent that. I think another way is to build a strong and supportive relationship with your children. And that involves really having open and honest conversations, talking early about sexual activity, um, and building a relationship where the child feels safe to come and tell you anything. Um, I know in my own process, I did not feel safe going and telling my parents, and it was more a fear of he was going to up the ante and he was going to do more to me. So if I would have had a different relationship with my parents in regards to that, and the times were much different. This was the '60s.
Right.
You didn't talk about that. I think another thing is teaching your children about body safety, boundaries. They used to talk about anything a swimsuit would cover was off limits. I think that conversation is much bigger than that, and I think that it's a conversation about touch anywhere on your arm that doesn't feel comfortable, touch anywhere on your body that does not feel comfortable. So I think that's it. And then I think becoming really aware of who your children are interacting with. That may be at school, that may be at friends' homes, that may be in coaching situations. It also online, that's an area that I don't think that we often think of, but there's perpetrators that are online, and really being aware of where your children are at and putting those parental limitations on their online activity.
Yeah. Um, to that thread, it's also understanding that anybody can appear to be anybody on like online, right? And
Absolutely.
so you can have somebody who's posing as a 10-year-old, 8-year-old, whatever, and the person on the other side is really not who they say they are, right?
Right.
So being really aware of how the online space can be manipulated and how these types of things can look differently because of the digital age and like privacy and how things can be very anonymous, right? It's like why cyberbullying takes off so quickly, because it's so easy to be anybody you want to online.
Absolutely.
So definitely having to understand that kind of landscape. The other thing I wanted to touch on, because you were talking about starting early and often and talking with your kids about what's appropriate behavior or not, and like what's comfortable in their bodies. When I was working for Prevent Child Abuse Vermont, I had to go through all of the different programs, even though I was only teaching one. And I had to sit in on early child abuse prevention program. I don't remember what it was called exactly, but one of the things that I took away from that, which I will never forget, and is something that I've employed as a parent, has been making sure that you teach your children the anatomically correct words for their body
Right.
parts, because perpetrators will tell them to call it something else. So it's a little secret. So they've got this code word for their body parts. But when your child is empowered with language to be able to say, so and so touched my penis, or so and so touched my vagina, or whatever, then there's a larger distinction for the child of knowing kind of like whether or not something was appropriate, because they have the appropriate language to understand, and then when they report, to be able to say exactly what they touched rather than having some sort of gross cutesy name for their body parts that the perpetrator has encouraged them to use.
That's a great
um,
idea.
so so we're running out of time. So I want to just end it here because we have covered a lot of terrain very quickly, and I know that these are hard things. um, I guess the last thing that I want you to be able to say to people, Sam, is like, how do you see your story doing more of this? Like, how do you see writing this book as providing more for parents and communities, like getting the word out?
Well, I think it's really about writing the book was part of my healing process. Um, but I think the real reason why I wanted to get the book out there is because I think sexual abuse has been talked about many times in regards to the female, and that I think that there's males that are being sexually abused. I think the statistic is 1 in 13, but I think it's probably higher than that. Um, Due to the number of men who do not report their sexual abuse. So I think it's really about, people starting to talk about this issue and being aware of it, having parents start to talk to their children, male and female, in regards to sexual abuse and things that they need to watch out for. I think it's also about, just bringing my perpetrator's name out into the public. Um, in order for other people that were abused by him to maybe
Mhm.
have the strength to come forward and tell
Yeah.
their story.
Yeah. I think the underlying thing here, right, is that the more we stay silent about the things that are happening, like the more that they're going to happen. So
Sure.
the more that we can be brave enough to have the hard conversations, to share experiences, to come forward, and to all realize how prevalent these things are, like the more we actually have the ability to change. And so each of us sharing our own individual story is really is a small piece of a much greater impact, right?
Absolutely.
And so hopefully your book is going to be one of those agents of change, as you share your story and you do more of these kinds of conversations, and, you help people get in touch with what could be going on in their communities.
Sure. Absolutely.
So I want to encourage everyone to donate to Sam's GoFundMe campaign. He's currently raising funds for his book, and every little bit helps when it comes to the production and publication costs. So please consider donating today. I'm going to put the GoFundMe campaign link into the comments for everyone. And I hope that you learned something from today's conversation. I hope that you'll be watching for the book to be coming out. Please go connect with Sam on LinkedIn. Sam, thank you so much for talking with me today. And I hope that the book does all the things that we're hoping that it will do.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.